Yo, have you heard of LinkedIn Learning? If you haven't, LinkedIn Learning is an American massive open online course provider. It provides video courses taught by industry experts in a variety of subjects. Now, why am I sharing this? I'm sharing this because Living Corporate is in partnership with LinkedIn Learning to provide diversity, equity, and inclusion courses. Listen, if you're trying to be a better ally, you want to understand better diversity, equity, inclusion strategies, or you just want to learn how to be a better leader, you got to check out the courses on LinkedIn Learning. So check it out. You can do it one of two ways. You can click the link in the show notes, or you go to LinkedIn Learning and you search Living Corporate. Again, link in the show notes, or go to LinkedIn Learning and search Living Corporate. I'll see you over there. What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Living Corporate, and I'm still excited. I'm still excited because we're going through something new. Now, look, when you were supposed to be tuning into this, we were supposed to have announced something and launched something. And you know what I'm saying, how projects go, delays happen. But I made a commitment to say that this week, y'all will be getting an update on something, right? I said that. I said something's going down. So I can't launch the thing today. What I can do is talk to you about it. So in a week's time, so you're going to see a lot of like social media promotions and stuff. In a week's time from now, Living Corporate's whole website, frankly, our entire network and platform is going to be completely relaunched. Okay. So if you've been rocking with us for any amount of time, you've heard me say that like we have tons of conversations that center and amplify Black and brown folks at work. Like we do this on a regular basis. This is like part of just who we are. It's intrinsic to our mission. We have genuinely hundreds of conversations with executives, entrepreneurs, activists, elected officials, authors, educators, other civic leaders. We're constantly talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in ways that decenter the white gaze and recenter historically marginalized perspectives and experiences. And so, you know, for me, as I was been thinking about Living Corporate and like the fact that like we sitting on all this thought leadership, we're sitting on all this IP. And even when we look at our own data, we see that there's people who are downloading content, listening to our podcast from like a year ago still, right? And I just said, man, what does it look like to really operationalize, like to really get the most out of all of this learning, all of this media? And so Living Corporate, we're doing a few things. But the main thing we're doing is we're making it so that if you create a free profile on Living Corporate and you select the types of topics that you're interested in, you will get content pushed to you from our library. So if you're interested in being an entrepreneur and a founder, if you're interested in the VC space, if you're interested in leadership development, if you're interested in being a better ally, if you're just interested in growing and developing your career, if you're interested in mental health and wellness, if you're interested in running for office, if you're interested in employee resource groups or like the future of ESG, then this is the platform for you. Because what's going to happen is you're going to select those different topics, and then you're going to get content recommendations pushed to you. We're going to pull from our library and say, hey, you said that you like this, so here's this, right? So that's the first thing. I'm really excited about that. And that's coming next week. The other thing that's coming next week is we really want to make sure that like we're mobilizing and taking advantage of the community that we have, right? We have a ton of people listening to Living Corporate across our whole network of shows every single week. And so for me, I really want to make sure that we're also sharing other resources. And so that means for us, we're launching a job board. I can't wait for this. Well, I have to wait. I am waiting. I can wait in reality because the design team isn't ready. But I am excited. It's a turn of phrasing. So I am excited, though, about the fact that not only will you get content recommendations, but you'll get job recommendations. There'll be tons of roles there, like based on like a ton of great brands and people that you've heard over the past few years. Some of them have been very willing to be like launch partners with us, and you're going to continue to see that job board grow and mature. And so I'm really excited about that. The other piece I'm excited about when it comes to the job board is there's this narrative that when you talk about job boards for historically marginalized talent, people immediately go to entry-level sales roles or entry-level, again, like fresh out of college roles or junior roles, which there's an inherent amount of white supremacy and racism that goes into even thinking like that. But I believe that over time, we're going to be able to really push against that narrative and prove out that our listenership is not only junior new careerists, but also mid to late careerists as well. And so I'm just excited about Living Corporate and where we're continuing to grow this year. Again, this week was supposed to be big launch, but that's next week. So this week, what I'm asking everyone who listens to Living Corporate to do, if you're checking this out right now, is to tell folks about Living Corporate, share the podcast with them, make sure that you're subscribed to our newsletter. If you are subscribed, share the newsletter with somebody else. Like, help us as we get ready to launch something new. Again, we're doing a very short promo run, not gonna kind of pop up like Beyonce. We're not Beyonce, you know what I'm saying? Even Drake got out the way for Beyonce. It's Beyonce. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're not that level. We're not doing no surprise drops. We are going to let y'all know, and this is me letting y'all know it's coming, right? So next week, make sure, if you're not following Living Corporate, if you're not tuned in, if you're not tapped in, make sure to do that. Speaking of which, today's episode, my conversation was with Dr. King, not Martin Luther King, another Dr. King, organizational psychologist who did a whole study on microaggressions and the psychology of microaggressions. That's why the name of the show is The Psychology of Microaggressions. And we talk a lot about the nuances of microaggressions as experienced by Black professionals at work. I cannot wait for y'all to hear this conversation. But before we tap into that conversation, we're going to tap in with Tristan, okay? So we'll see you in a little bit.
What's going on, Living Corporate? It's Tristan, and I want to thank you for tapping back in with me as I provide some tips and advice for professionals. This week, let's talk about 3 things that may be missing from your job search. Being back on the job market can be tough. Applying to endless jobs, getting instant rejections, or worse, never hearing back at all. It all starts to take a toll on you after a while. But after working with over 500 job seekers, I've realized that we can avoid much of this if we took the time to figure out how to, and I use air quotes here, properly search for a job. I've noticed that 3 main things are missing from most job seekers' search and puts them in a constant pattern of endless online applications. First is clarity. I often find job seekers rushing into finding a new job without ever taking the time to figure out what type of role they want. That's like expecting your GPS to tell you where to go without entering an address. You have to have a destination before figuring out the route to get there. Otherwise, you'll just idly sit and waste your gas. The same applies to your job search. If you aren't clear on what type of role you want to land, you can never devise a plan to help you secure it. If you don't get clear, you'll waste all your energy on applying, interviewing, and waiting for the wrong roles just to say you're making progress in your job search. The second thing your job search is missing is a professional brand. Building a professional brand allows people who've never met you to understand what you do, what type of results you create, and what value you would bring to an organization. Nowadays, people want social proof that you are who you say you are and do what you say you do. A professional brand provides that. If you can build a strong professional brand, you'll likely end up with companies and organizations reaching out to you to see if you're interested in roles. After cultivating my professional brand around career coaching and resume writing, I had universities reaching out about roles in their career centers, and I had companies reaching out about providing coaching at their organizations. The third thing missing from your job search is a strong network. You only have about a 2% chance of landing a role by applying online, but referrals make you 15 times more likely to land a position. The bottom line is, a good network can help people stand out from the crowd and secure the job. You need to develop advocates who understand the value you bring and can vouch for you in spaces you're not in. Most people wait until they need a network to start building one or to warm up old connections, which is too late. Start building or warming up your network when you don't actually need them, so the relationship is less transactional. If you focus on these 3 areas, you'll tighten up your job search process. While it may be a bit more work on the front end, I can guarantee it will reduce the amount of time you spend looking at and applying for roles. Thanks for tapping in with me this week. This tip was brought to you by Tristan of Layfield Resume Consulting. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Layfield Resume, or connect with me, Tristan Layfield, on LinkedIn.
Dr. King, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Listen, I reached out to you because of the research that you published. Actually, we connected a little while ago, but this hasn't been published that long. Like, this was published in May, I believe.
Yeah.
When thriving requires effortful surviving, delineating manifestations and resource expenditure outcomes of microaggressions for Black employees. My goodness, that's a bar. Okay, so let's start off with, what does this title mean?
It's long when you read it out like that. So we tried to get in there the key variables, right? So of course the paper's focusing on microaggressions, uncovering these subtle, ambiguous, daily forms of racism that persist, right? And that many organizations don't have policies to address. And then the delineating piece is like the resource expenditure. So the work that Black people have to engage in to deal with microaggressions that we don't have work looking at, in the workplace, what's going on and how is it taking mental and physical energy away from your job, from learning opportunities, from other things we would like to focus on. And in the beginning, the thriving requires effortful surviving. That was just something I really wanted to include to show that, to survive, to succeed in these environments, there's a lot of extra work that Black people are having to engage in.
It's interesting. I know a little bit because I watched the video, and I'll put the video in the show notes for folks to check out. But the summary that you did of the study, talk to me about like how you approached this. So I talked to other professors and there's other researchers. Like, I'm curious, did you go into this study with like some hypotheses or kind of like conclusions you figured that what you would reach, and then also like, what informed your approach on how you conducted the study and put this research together?
Absolutely. So I have to shout out my friend David Hollingsworth. When I was at Spelman, he was at Morehouse, and we were super close there. He's in clinical psych. He actually has already done a lot more in microaggressions. This is one of my first publications on microaggressions, but he and I had been saying for years, like, we want to collaborate, we want to do something. And so, I'm in organizational psychology looking at the work experience. And so he brought the idea to me about, let's look at this phenomenon in the workplace. And I'm really interested in race and identity. And I also know that, psychology suffers from a lack of diversity in our samples. We just don't have a lot of Black people's voices in these findings that we, come up with, or in these theories that we talk about. And so he and I came together and we were like, let's do, microaggressions at work. And as an initial study, say, like, why is it harmful? What is it doing? Why does this matter? So this burnout, job satisfaction effects that organizations care so much about and that really hurts employees every day. So we did go in having an intuitive sense, like microaggressions are taking up a lot of energy and resources, and it's going to harm work experiences. I would have been shocked if we found the opposite, like if they were like positive, which we didn't find those positive effects, but we did go in expecting to see just that, like the depleting nature of workplace microaggressions.
You had you interviewed several, and actually, I want you to confirm the number for those who don't know. But several Black professionals really to share their stories and experiences around microaggressions. How many folks was that again?
I feel like it was like 90, but let me look. Now I gotta look at the methods. I think it was about 90 people.
That's a lot of people. In that summary that you gave, that video that you recorded about the study itself, one of your graduate students was speaking to the impact that it had on them, just hearing all of those stories. Like, we're going to get into these stories a bit. I'm curious, like, a bit of meta commentary here. What was your experience engaging and sharing your research with your white colleagues or peers or just folks in your space, and like and dealing with, I'm assuming that some of them were surprised or disappointed or shocked, like what was that like for you as a black woman in this majority white space in white academia, to just like
Yeah.
deal with, and I'm not you didn't say this, Dr. King, I'm saying this, so I'm not, but to deal with the annoyance of like white folks being shocked at like racism like that. Like, talk to me. What did that
Yeah.
feel like for you? How did you process that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting phenomenon because I think I'm honestly really fortunate at Rice. It's 6 of us in our group who study organizational psychology, and 3 of us study diversity and inclusion. So, like, and a lot of my colleagues are very interested in these things. So, I don't think in my direct, like, my department, I got a lot of like shock from the effects. But definitely in broader audiences, like presenting at conferences and talking about this stuff, it's so fascinating, but it just encourages me. That's why we need this work. Like, anecdotally, any black person you talk to like knows this and has experienced it, but it's clear that because science doesn't include black voices in those samples, it's just not getting out there. And so I'm not shocked, unfortunately, when people are shocked. But it just motivates me to be like, okay, we need to publish this, even though it may seem like duh to me. To a lot of people, it's not. And now there's this citation we can go to when we have these conversations.
So there's like this other concept I've been seeing on TikTok. Outside note, like one day maybe we'll have you back. I feel like we can talk about. We can deep dive into this. I feel like social media, like everybody's like a PhD on social media. People be using these phrases and terms. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if Dr. Courtney McClooney has said that before. I don't really know if I heard that before. But
Yeah,
okay. But like I've
yeah.
heard this term called like weaponized incompetence and weaponized ignorance. Okay, so like
Mhm.
the idea of just like being willingly um, obtuse in the name of not having to like be accountable to anything. How much of this do you feel like any of that is in play when it comes to even having to have these conversations, even having to have these studies? Because like to your point, you're like in your mind it's like duh. And honestly, I don't really prescribe to the idea that like black folks are like inherently more conscious or aware of like what's happening. Some of it I
Yeah.
think is just people just don't want to know. Like how much of that surprise or like need to have, how much of that do you believe is authentic?
That's a really good question. And it makes me think about Toni Morrison's quote that, the very serious function of racism is distraction. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
gets us trying to prove we do have this, we can do this, we are experiencing this. So I do agree that there is some function of people continuing to be ignorant or ignore certain things. I can't say that I've seen data on that. So I think that's interesting. I don't know if I've seen studies on it, but I do know that absolutely that takes time away from a lot of efforts that we could be going, beyond the bare minimum stuff that we still have to get out there.
Word. So, in the conversations that you had in the study, and again, oh no, actually, I'm gonna put the link in here because actually, I want to let you know that King, I paid for this. I bought it. You know what I'm saying? So, shout out to
Appreciate that.
no, absolutely. Shout out to the black researchers and stuff. And just as a personal aside, you listen to this, make sure you actually like buy the studies, right? Like these black folks, these professors, these researchers, they come together, they do all this work. They took, sometimes multiple years of time because academia moves extremely slow from what I've seen and experienced. You can take the time to put this little $15 on the little link and download the study. I have it on Adobe PDF. I'm not going to share it with you. I want you to go ahead and I want you to buy it yourself. Okay, buy it yourself. It's not $1,000. It's not even $50. For me, it was like $16. I don't have some special. That was just the cost. All right. All right. With that being said,
Wait,
back to
and
what.
I'll say just so people know, when you buy this, I don't directly get any money, and I am also happy to, if people really can't afford it or they're like, I don't have it for that, I will send people the PDF.
Well,
Yeah,
that's great. Okay, see now
but
that's
I
dope.
appreciate you supporting.
I didn't want to volunteer to give away, but if you're cool with sharing this and you give that's cool, then yeah,
Yeah,
hit us up. Hit me up, Zach at living-corporate.com or livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. We got it. We'll share it. But I'm saying if you are able to
yeah,
just support the work, you know what I mean? All right. Now, with that being said, you interviewed all these folks, all these
yes,
black folks,
yes.
and you out of those conversations, you pulled out themes, right? Like, talk to me about, we're going to get into some of these themes, but talk to me about how you arrived at these themes and specific codes from all of the interviews that you had.
Absolutely. So with as you shared, like interviewing over 90 people is really a lot for qualitative work. Usually qualitative studies have a lot less than that, but I really didn't want to miss anything. Like I wanted to get as many experiences as I could in there. So we definitely read all of these interviews, right? Like the questions that we asked, we conducted the interviews, audio recorded them, got them transcribed, and then my graduate student Elisa and I, we sat down and we read through all of these interviews multiple times, and we started to pull what things were emerging that we saw repeating across experiences, that we saw, people sharing experiences that were connected to what someone else was saying. And so it really was this, what they call this grounded approach. Like we let the data tell us the story of what are people facing and how are some people's experiences similar? How are some people's experiences unique to create like new codes? But it was very emotionally charged, right? Like the things that people shared were some of those quotes too in that paper are really hard to read. They're really heartbreaking and sad. And I had to sometimes just step away from it and, remind myself like, this is why it's important to publish it. So people know that Black people are dealing with this kind of stuff in the workplace. To like motivate myself, I would call my mentor too, Derek Avery, and, say, I'm heartbroken by this. Please encourage me, because it's just really hard to read and see and want to just reach out to the person individually, of course. But really also trying to remember that maybe coming up with these themes helps Black people know, A, you're not alone. B, you're not crazy. You're not imagining this. It is a problem. This is what, this is the term that you can use to identify what's going on. And leaders recognize that this is what's happening. And when these things happen, that's a microaggression and that's harming people.
We're gonna get into these themes because I have some specific questions. You, in your answer just now, though, at what point do we pivot from microaggressions to macroaggressions?
That's a great question. So the original work that came up with this conceptualization of microaggressions talks about whether it is subtle and ambiguous in intent. Like if you're not sure that it's rooted in racism, but you have a feeling, you got an inkling that it is. If it's not directly saying it's about race, it's generally considered a microaggression. But if it's saying like, oh, I think this about, you as a Black person, that's a bit more overt, and that gets into that macro sphere.
So that's dope. See, this is my issue. Sometimes I feel like So academics, like in research, y'all come up with these terms that are like, and y'all have very clear definitions. But then like these people are like in these DEI spaces, they come around and then they like take the terms and then they jack up the definition. You know what I'm saying? Because so here, I'll give you an example. So what your definition of, okay, microaggression is, it's subtle. It's not overt. It's not named. I can't put my finger on why it's racist. But there's something in there that I don't like, right?
Yes.
But oftentimes the way that I see microaggressions popularly defined or framed is like racism, but like not mean. And I'm like, no, that's not a microaggression.
Oh, interesting.
Do you know what I'm saying though? Like, I'll give you an example. Like if someone says, this is my first job outside of retail. I started as a manager at Target, HR manager Target. Then I got into oil and gas job. All right, so I'm sitting down with my boss, who is from Buffalo, New York, white woman, very New York. And I'm talking. She's asking me a question. I'm like, I don't know. I'm talking. I don't know what I'm talking about, Dr. King. Whatever. So she goes, she pauses, and like you can kind of tell, like her eyes kind of glaze over. She's kind of like not listening to me. She's kind of looking past me, and I was like, okay. And then she said, "You're so articulate," and I said,
"Yes."
No. Hold on, Dr. King.
I already know.
All right. No, I promise you don't know about it.
I don't know. Okay, tell me.
So she said, "You're so articulate," and I said, "Thank you," because I was like 22 at the time. I said, "Thank you." She goes, "Are your parents Black?" And I said, "My mom is black. My dad is black. Everybody black around here. She goes,
Mm,
oh, see, like to me, that's not like a microaggression. Like
yeah.
that's racist. Like, why did you?
See,
Why would?
it's interesting. The second sentence directly connects her first sentence to race. So that one gets fuzzy because usually if it would have only been like I get that in my teaching, I used to, not recently, thank goodness, but I used to get that in my teaching evaluations all the time. And it used to drive me crazy. You're so articulate, you're so articulate. I'm like, would you be shocked if an older white male was up here talking to y'all saying the exact same thing? Like
Right.
so that's interesting because her follow-up comment was, are your parents black? As if it's clearly the race is referenced and mentioned here. So I'm assuming that you're only articulate because somebody must not be black. Yeah, that's problematic.
Some non-blacks raised you
Yeah,
to
yeah,
speak and allocate
yeah,
yourself in this way. So, all right. So now, let's get back to these themes. Okay.
yeah.
So, um, one of the things I found very, very interesting, racialized role assignment.
Mhm.
Um, and this idea of, and then you have the theme, and then you have like like the subcategory, right? And so there's one that says prescribed subservience within racialized role assignment. And so here's the quote that I wanted to read from one of the people you interviewed. I was named the leader of the Minority Networking Committee. The committee was set up for me to basically tell other Black people how to assimilate into white culture in order to fit for promotions. I was honestly afraid of how I would be viewed in the organization if I didn't accept the position, but I did not want to do it. Um,
Mm,
like I talk to me about this theme of racialized role assignment, and I find it intriguing as someone who exists in the corporate space, because when I think about like microaggressions, or I think about like just this experience of Black, especially like high performing Black folks, or Black folks who are seen as acceptable, or
mhm.
just seen as high, just who are well liked
Yeah.
by the white majority. There, I see this in play a lot. But could you unpack a bit more about how you define this theme and more about it, just a bit?
Absolutely. So this theme is really about, well, I'll say first that I am a firm reiterator that we do not have evidence of biological differences based on racial categorization, right? There's lots of research that shows I am not fit for a certain position or unfit for a position like leadership because I'm Black, right? I'm not less capable of certain things because of my race. Race is a social construct that we have created in this country for very specific, harmful, purposes originally, and it now has meaning tied to it because of that history. But this theme is all about assuming people are and should be in certain roles in an organization because of their race. So it takes away the agency, it takes away the choice. It assumes this monolith of Black people. If you're Black, you should do the DEI thing. If you're Black, you must not be the leader here. So I'm going to walk past you to get to the next person to ask them because I'm assuming they must be the leader here, not you. So it's all about that assumption of where people are and should be in an organization.
It's interesting. I recall a couple of years ago, I was still in consulting at the time. Now I'm in like tech space, but after the murder of George Floyd,
Mhm.
and it was curious, like how the organization presumed, or kind of like just said, okay, well, you should go do this, or you should go do that. I'm like, they don't want to do that. They don't want to have a conversation to share their trauma for you to like gawk at and be entertained by. Like, that's not what is.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this though. Now I know this wasn't in the study, but you're an org psych, and
Yeah.
you've had an illustrious career. So I feel like you might have a perspective on this. I kind of wonder, like, what do you think about this? Is why it's not live, but I'm asking anyway. I don't care. Dr. King, watch this. Um, I feel like there's some Black folks out there that like play into this in terms of like leveraging it for the sake of their own career progression. So they'll be willingly tokenized in the name of progressing
Mm,
in the ladder of white acceptance, or career growth, or if they see it as a way for them to kind of like move forward, even if they don't actually care about that work, right? So the example
Mhm.
that you gave around this quote of, oh, okay, hey, I'm this person is in this role to really like create assimilation, or as I've said
Yeah.
on other podcasts, highly academic term, Dr. King, to de-niggify niggas. Um,
I'm not repeating that, but I hear you.
you see, okay, you see 'em. All right. So uh what what do you say about that? Because that's a real thing too, is like I've
Mhm.
seen people in these roles who like really will like lean into these
Mm,
functions in the name of, hey, this is gonna get me X, this is gonna get me Y.
yeah. I think it's so fascinating. And literally, your question just brings to mind the reason why I went into academia, because I'm always like, why? Why though? And I know that so much that we see in organizations about, Black employee choices, behaviors, language, you know, impression management, so many things are driven by these structures that tell us, do you want to get ahead? Do you want to survive? Do you want, this is what you need to do. And so I have grace for people who do what you're describing, where it's like, this is the only way I see out, because I'm like, everybody got to eat, right? But I also do wonder, how can we address these systems so that the people in those roles are the people who are really passionate about it, who are really connected to it, who are really experts in those areas. I think that that's a really important question. But I think right now organizations really reward what you're describing. And so it's hard to know what people's intentions are really, sometimes, but I also understand the why, unfortunately.
Did you notice in your conversations any like stark differences or points of perspective, or thematic points of perspective or a difference on the variable of gender, right? So like
Mm,
I asked because I see this. There's a quote here, and
yeah.
this really resonated with me. And it was also, it's kind of triggering. I need to talk to my therapist about this next week. My boss has recommended go to therapy, y'all. My boss has recommended that I not let people at work get to me. I've taken that
Mm,
approach too, but it doesn't feel adequate because I value being respected, and it feels
yeah.
like he's getting away with not being professional. I've also vented to several coworkers and friends about it. Venting
Yeah.
helps more than simply ignoring the behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. So we didn't look specifically like model gender differences, but we did see some very gendered microaggressions come out. Like for the pathologizing physical attributes, we saw Black women talk a lot about hair. And, people walking up and grabbing their hair, people setting up meetings to talk to them because their hair is unprofessional. Yes, we saw lots of those quotes. And for Black men, we saw the prescribed role assignment in terms of prescribed physicality. We saw, Black men talking about, I'm on a university campus with a suit on, and people are asking me, oh, you ready for the football game? Like assuming I'm on the team when I'm not. And so we saw, people assuming interest in, or people being in certain roles that were very gendered, unfortunately.
I remember this time. I think I've told the story before. I live in corporate. This is my first job.
Yeah.
Um, Again, I was an HR manager at Target. So you HR manager at a store, Dr. King, you have
Yeah.
your role, but then you also have to be like the store manager. You got to walk around.
Yeah.
Aisle 5 will spill over here, whatever over there, whatever. And so I was doing my thing. I was on I was Ella, I was leader on duty. So I'm walking around, got the walkie-talkie, whatever.
Hmm.
All right. So so I walk in the frozen aisle section, and
Hmm.
I see a employee, his shirt's untucked. So I'm like, oh, okay, you probably must be off the clock. And I see him. He's not punching this person, but he's kind of like pushing her and kind of physically imposing himself against her now. And she like
Hmm.
knocking against the dairy aisle and stuff. It's crazy. And I said, hey. And I walked over there,
Hmm.
I say, yo, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Hey. I said, hey, you can so I when I went over there, she kind of like went away. He said, that's my girlfriend. Da, da, da. I said, listen, you can get up out of here,
Hmm.
or I'm gonna call AP. I'm gonna get you up out of here.
Yeah.
So that story went around, the fact that I went up to somebody, and
Mm,
so the next day I got called in to my boss's office, and he
mm,
was like, Zach, you can't, somehow the story wasn't about this dude being abusive to his to this
Mm.
woman, it was about me being a bully at work.
Yeah.
He's like, and
Yeah.
he literally said, you're big and you're black.
Mm-mm.
So, yes, I'm telling you, Dr. King, it's crazy out here. Stay over there in that academia where it's not safe over there. Let
I'm
me
about to
put
say, don't tell the people that academia is without problems.
it's
It's not
literally not
true.
safe at all. Shout out to Dr. McClooney and a bunch of PhDs on here talking about how not safe it is in that white ivory. But I'm saying though, it's crazy out here in the wild.
Yeah.
But my point is like that's a real thing, right? Like again, like so many of these stories, they resonate with me as a man, like these themes around, I'm not gonna call them themes for the sake of your research, but like this pattern I saw of just like people mentioning respect, right? Like, like, and the how much we have to swallow, which goes back to your title of just how much we have to like just stomach to survive. Let me
Wait,
let me
that what you just said is our first theme, that anti-black stereotype expression. One of the first quotes that we talk about for the ascription of criminality, negative interpersonal ascription. So assuming that people don't know how to navigate, social interactions, are not kind, are not polite, are not being gentle, because they weren't there. They don't even know what you said to the person, how close you got. But the assumption is you were too close, you were intimidating. That's what one of the participants shared with us. I'm just told that I'm intimidating. So it's like you take these assumptions, these stereotypes about a group, and you apply them to people so that anything they do, it's real easy to get confirmation bias of, I knew you were intimidating, I knew you were big and scary, I knew you were that way, which is really unfortunate. And I'm sorry you had to go through that, because that's
listen,
hard.
it happens every day around here, in terms of just like, you have conversation with somebody and you give them some feedback they don't like, or you say, hey, I didn't really appreciate that, or hey,
Yeah.
you did this and I was confused, or hey, you did this and I was disappointed. That
Yeah.
morphs into, hey, you made this person feel bad, or they felt whatever. And it's like, man, like we're
Yeah.
just having a conversation. Like we have to be willing, like in any context, right? Academic or
Yeah.
nonprofit or for profit or governmental, we have to be, we have our ability to communicate and have direct conversations is important, right? But like, and it's funny because I'm not the only, like I talked to several Black executives on and off the record around Living Corporate. And again, like on and off the record, this is a common thing, just like not having your behavior or your actions taken at like the most aggressive or negative, or it's like being framed through this like, aggressive, nasty light.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so where is space for authenticity? Where is space for benefit of the doubt? Where is space for people to feel safe in a place if they can't even speak assertively, not aggressively, but assertively, with which is healthy, which is said to be, a positive form of leadership communication, all this stuff that's rewarded, if that immediately is assumed to be rooted in aggression.
So look, now we could keep on going because I got some more questions, but I told you I'll honor your time. I will ask you
No,
this
you're
though.
good. You're good.
Okay, good. Because I want to ask you this, Dr. King. Like, what needs to happen, do you believe, for us to, because we started this conversation about like kind of not calling this work surface because it is not.
Yeah.
Right. But the distraction of some of this space and like the opportunity to go deeper.
Yeah.
What do you believe needs to happen so that your Black researchers such as yourself, shout out to Dr. McClooney, who's also been on the show, and
I love
others.
Courtney. Hey, Courtney.
Yo, shout out to Court. She is super dope. I'm a super fan. But my point is though, like y'all do a lot of research and deep analysis on things that like we as a people, Black folks, we know exist.
Yeah.
What will it take, or what do you feel like you need to see, like just as a academic,
Yeah.
to continue the conversation deeper?
I will say that one of the encouraging things I've seen in the last like 2 years that I would love to see more of
Mm.
is people embracing this work in general. Like, I think that there was a time where, me and Courtney's mentors, it was hard to say race. It was easy to say diversity. It was easy to say, other things that are not race, that are not anti-Black racism. Whereas now we're seeing journals give out, call for papers. Like, we want papers on race. We want papers on anti-Black racism. We want papers specifically on these topics. So I think more of that is really important in journals, and the editors and the reviewers really realizing that, there's public research. One of my colleagues, Eden King at Rice, she's published and with Derek Avery showing that, in journals, there's a higher bar for DEI research. It has to be better than other papers to just get a chance to revise and resubmit to a journal. And so I think more awareness of those barriers to really getting this work out and getting grants to support this work would be really helpful for us to keep doing the work.
Yep. Yeah. I am here for the research. I love, you're absolutely right that, and see, I didn't appreciate it because I'm not in this space, how under-engaged, under-resourced, and under-supported Black academics are and have been since this whole thing was erected. And so let me ask you one last thing. I recognize that you are a researcher, but you talked to dozens of Black folks at various levels of in the organization. If you were to give 3 points of advice to white executives for to create a more psychologically safe place to work, what would it be?
That is a great question. Such a big question too. So 3 pieces of advice. One thing I have to say is that we often forget, or organizations and leaders often forget, how cost effective and efficient it is to just ask people. Like, send out a survey, an anonymous survey about, what are you dealing with? What would be helpful for you, right? To your employees. Actually listen and get reports from your Black employee resource groups about what do they need, what would be helpful for them. Because every org is different, right? Every industry is different. And so sometimes there are things that people need to feel safe that are unique to that occupation. And so I think that leaders often try to assume what people need. And so the first piece of advice would be to ask people what they need in ways that people might feel safe actually telling you that. So like I said, the groups that can give you a report, or the anonymous surveys, can be really helpful. The next thing I would say is, and this is something that Courtney McClooney and I published about, which I'm really excited about. We have this paper from Calling in Black to Calling for Anti-Racism Resources, is that for Black employees to really feel safe and included, general well-being resources are nice, but there also needs to be racism countering action in the organization. So action specifically focused on acknowledging, directed to counter racism across different industries, right? So not just the chief diversity officer doing things, but the people in selection acknowledging, the research we have on racial discrimination selection and doing something to counter it. The people in leadership and promotion and selection acknowledging the research we have that shows, Black people are seen as less capable leaders, irrespective of qualifications. So what are people doing actively to counter the ways that racism just seeps into so many parts of the organization? The third thing I would say would be to give Black people a break. And the Harvard Business Review that Courtney and I published talks about, we need rest. Racism is, there's that Clark model, the biopsychosocial model of racism, that racism physically and psychologically kills. And so people need time to rest. So in addition to managing the daily microaggressions, the overt racism that's still alive and well, I think, paid leave, opportunities for people to say no to opportunities that are offered to them, like leading a DEI group when they're already feeling exhausted and burnt out, is so important. So realizing that people are depleted by this adversity, I think, would be really helpful.
Dr. King, it's been a pleasure, been an honor. Thank you so much for being willing to be on Living Corporate. Count you as a friend of the show.
Yes.
And thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
No doubt. We'll talk soon. Peace. And we're back. Yo, shout out to to Dr. Danielle King. Shout out to all Black academics out there trying to do the right things by really leaning into these extremely white, extremely elitist systems for the sake of giving our experience a voice. There's something to be said about stepping into a world that frankly has been historically exclusive to all Black and brown people, particularly Black and brown women, and to adopt those languages and the vernacular and the jargon to then speak to the realities of racism and oppression. It's empowering work. It's powerful work. It's encouraging work. I can't thank Dr. King enough for being a guest. Shout out again to all the Black academics. And y'all, this has been Zach with Living Corporate. Like I said, next week, new website, new experiences, new solutions, new resources, right? And I cannot wait for y'all to check it out. Make sure you give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. We got a few short of 300, y'all. Like, that's a little milestone for us. Make sure you go ahead and show us some love on there. Make sure you share this pod with a friend, a family member, an enemy, maybe. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, whatever you want to do. If you want to be passive aggressive, like you want to call somebody racist, maybe you flip this podcast to them. I'm not sure. I don't, do what you like. I can't really control you. You're grown. You do what you want to do. Until next time, peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.